The letter wasn't heavy, but it landed on his kitchen table like a brick. David stared at it for a long time before touching it. The envelope was thick, the kind the court always used, with his name typed in block letters across the front. He already knew what it was. He'd known the moment he'd seen the return address through the thin paper window. Still, some part of him hoped it might be a mistake. It wasn't. The words felt like they were printed in ice, notice of temporary suspension of visitation rights. His hands shook as he read it again. The reason was spelled out in clinical language: failure to remit child support payment for the month of April. It was true. He had missed it. 1 month. The first time in 5 years. He could still see the day it happened, a hospital room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above his head, his mother hooked up to machines that breathed for her. His savings had gone in one gulp: copays, medicine, keeping her house from falling apart while she recovered. He thought the court would understand. He thought he could make it right with a double payment the next month. He was wrong. The phone rang. His stomach twisted when he saw the name, Rachel. His ex. "I just got the notice," she said. Her voice was sharp, every syllable clipped. "The court's already updated the schedule. You're not seeing them this month." Rachel. "This is what happens when you don't hold up your end, David. I told you the court doesn't mess around with deadbeats." "I'm not," he stopped himself. Explaining was useless. The line went dead. That night, his apartment felt like a stranger's place. There were still traces of the kids everywhere: Liam's sneakers by the door, Emma's rainbow hairbrush on the counter. He'd told them they'd go to the park that weekend. Now, how did you explain to an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that a piece of paper said you weren't allowed to see them? He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine their faces when Rachel told them. He imagined Emma crying. He imagined Liam pretending not to care. By morning, he'd made a decision: this wasn't going to be permanent. The first step was money. David had been working at the same logistics company for 6 years, hauling shipments between warehouses. But the hours had been cut when the company lost a big contract. He took on extra shifts at a friend's auto shop, working until his hands cramped from tightening bolts. Every spare dollar went into a separate account: child support first, rent second, food third. His own needs didn't factor in. His fridge was down to bread, eggs, and whatever was on clearance at the corner store. He sent the missed payment plus the next one early, thinking that would open the door. It didn't. The court clerk told him his only option was to file for a hearing. That meant forms, fees, and, most terrifying, standing in front of a judge. 2 weeks later, the first hearing date came. David sat at the defendant's table, the smell of old carpet and paper hanging in the courtroom air. Rachel sat at the other table in a navy blazer, her lawyer whispering in her ear. When the judge called the case, David stood, palms sweating. "Mr. Sanders," the judge said without looking up from the file, "I see you've missed a payment in April." "Yes, Your Honor." But it was. That's not in dispute. The law is clear. Visitation is tied to compliance with support orders. You may file a motion to reinstate, but until then, the suspension remains. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Rachel didn't look at him as she left. He didn't expect her to. The walk back to his car felt longer than the whole morning. He passed other parents in the hallway, mothers in tears, fathers clutching folders of documents, all of them wearing the same expression, a mix of exhaustion and defiance. In the parking lot, he sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel until the leather creaked. 1 missed payment. 1 month. And the system had decided he was dangerous enough to be kept away from his own children. Fine. He thought. If they want a fight, I'll give them one. That night, he opened his laptop and started reading everything he could find about custody law. He learned how to request modification hearings, how to subpoena records, how to prove consistent payment history. The legal jargon was a foreign language at first, but he forced himself to understand it. He also learned something else: how many fathers never got their rights back because they didn't fight hard enough or didn't know how. David wasn't going to be one of them. By the end of the week, he had a plan. But plans took money, and money meant more hours. He started delivering groceries in the mornings, working the auto shop in the afternoons, and running warehouse shifts overnight. Sleep became optional. He kept a photo of Liam and Emma taped to the dashboard of his delivery van. When exhaustion made the road blur, he'd look at their faces and keep driving. The next hearing was set for 8 weeks away. 8 weeks to turn himself into the kind of father the court couldn't ignore. By week 3, David's apartment looked less like a home and more like a war room. Legal pads covered the coffee table, each one filled with scribbled notes from late-night research. A whiteboard leaned against the wall with dates circled in red, payment history, receipts, every scrap of evidence that he'd been a reliable father until April. The receipts mattered. The court didn't want promises or stories, it wanted proof. His mornings started at 5:30 a.m., delivering groceries before most of the city woke. By 9 a.m., he was in coveralls at the auto shop, inhaling the smell of grease and gasoline. At 4 p.m., he swapped the coveralls for a warehouse badge and loaded pallets until midnight. Then he'd go home, shower, and read case law until his eyes burned. It wasn't sustainable, but it didn't have to be, he just had to last until the hearing. One Tuesday afternoon, he drove past the schoolyard just as recess ended. Through the chain-link fence, he saw Liam shooting hoops with 2 friends. The ball bounced off the rim and rolled toward the fence, stopping just a few feet from where David's truck idled. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Liam froze, the ball in his hands. His mouth opened like he was about to say something. Then the bell rang, and he jogged back toward the school building without a word. David gripped the steering wheel, swallowing the lump in his throat. He couldn't even wave. If Rachel caught wind of it, she'd claim he was harassing them during school hours. He drove away. The nights were the worst. Lying in bed, he replayed every mistake he'd made in the marriage, every argument where he should have kept quiet, every sarcastic remark that Rachel might have remembered in court. But guilt was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he focused on preparation. He started calling other fathers he'd met in the courthouse lobby, men with worn faces and tired eyes, men who'd been chewed up by the same system. They told him what worked, what didn't, which judges listened and which didn't care. One man, Marcus, had been through almost the exact same situation, a missed payment after a medical emergency. He'd fought for a year to get his rights back, and when he finally did, he became a volunteer legal advocate. Paper is everything, Marcus told him over coffee. They'll ignore your tears. They'll ignore your explanations. But they can't ignore a stack of bank statements taller than their case file. David took it to heart. He built his file until it was heavy enough to need a second binder. The turning point came 6 weeks before the hearing. His lawyer, hired with money from selling his late father's watch, called with a surprise. "I think we have something," she said. "Rachel filed a motion last year claiming you'd missed payments in 2022. The court denied it, but it's in the record. If we show that she's tried to pull this before, it undercuts her credibility." David felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. The weeks blurred together, work, paperwork, brief glimpses of the kids from afar. His arms ached from lifting crates, his back ached from hours hunched over legal forms. But the binder grew fatter, and with it, his resolve. The night before the hearing, he sat at his kitchen table staring at the binder. He thought about the first time he held Liam in the hospital, about Emma's laugh when she'd learned to ride her bike. He thought about the day the court took them away. And he made himself a promise. "Tomorrow, I'm walking out of that courtroom with a step toward getting my kids back." Morning came cold and gray. He wore his only suit, a navy one from his sister's wedding, pressed the night before. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Rachel was already there, her lawyer flipping through a slim folder that looked almost pitiful compared to David's binders. She didn't look at him, but he could feel her tension in the set of her shoulders. The judge entered. The bailiff called their case. David took a breath, stood, and opened the binder. The judge's voice was calm, almost bored, as he explained the format of the hearing. Rachel's lawyer went first, speaking in polished, clipped sentences that painted David as reckless and unreliable. "One missed payment," the attorney said, "is not simply a financial lapse. It's a failure of responsibility. A parent's primary duty is to ensure their children's needs are met. Mr. Hayes failed." David sat perfectly still, his hands clasped on the table. His lawyer had warned him, "Don't fidget, don't react. Let them talk." When it was her turn, his lawyer stood and adjusted her glasses. "Your Honor," she began, "we're not here to discuss a pattern of neglect, because there isn't one. We're here over a single payment, missed during a period when Mr. Hayes was recovering from surgery, out of work, and paying his own medical expenses. In over 5 years, this is the only blemish on his record." She reached into the binder and laid out a neat row of bank statements. "We have documented proof of every payment made before and after that month. We also have medical records and employment termination notices to explain the lapse." Rachel shifted in her seat. David noticed her eyes dart to the binder, then away again. His lawyer continued, her voice gaining momentum. "And one more thing, Your Honor, last year, the petitioner filed a similar motion, claiming my client had missed multiple payments in 2022. That motion was dismissed for lack of evidence. We believe this shows a pattern of bad faith litigation." The judge raised an eyebrow and flipped through the older case file. Then came the cross-examination. David took the stand, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Hayes," Rachel's lawyer said smoothly, "would you agree that your children's needs come before your own?" "Yes," David said. "Always." "And yet, you missed a payment." "Yes. While recovering from surgery, when I had no income and was paying hospital bills. I informed the child support office immediately and made a double payment the following month." A faint murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rachel's lawyer leaned closer. "Isn't it true you could have asked family for help?" "I could have," David said, "but my father passed away, my mother's on a fixed income, and I'm not in the habit of asking strangers for rent money." The lawyer blinked. The judge scribbled something in his notes. When it was over, David stepped down, his legs weak but steady. The judge didn't rush. He looked from Rachel to David, then back again. Finally, he spoke. "While the court acknowledges the seriousness of child support obligations, it must also weigh the totality of circumstances. Mr. Hayes has demonstrated a consistent record of payment, with a single lapse caused by verifiable medical hardship. Furthermore, the court is concerned by the petitioner's prior unsuccessful motion on similar grounds." He set down his pen. "Effective immediately, Mr. Hayes's visitation rights are restored. Full custody will remain shared, with the understanding that both parties act in good faith moving forward." The gavel hit wood. David exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. His lawyer squeezed his shoulder. Rachel stood stiffly, lips pressed together, avoiding his eyes. In the courthouse lobby, Liam and Emma were waiting with David's sister. The kids didn't hesitate, they ran to him, arms flung wide. Liam hit him in the chest first, then Emma wrapped herself around his waist. "You're coming home, right?" Emma's voice was muffled against his shirt. "Yeah, baby," David whispered, hugging them so tightly his arms shook. "I'm coming home." That night, in his small apartment, they made pancakes for dinner. Liam spilled syrup on the counter, Emma burned the first batch, and David didn't care. When they were finally asleep on the pull-out couch, he stood in the doorway and just watched them breathe. The war wasn't over, there would be more hearings, more paperwork, more moments of doubt. But tonight, he'd won. And in that quiet, with the smell of syrup still in the air, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better.